This is Tom here, here with Daniel. And before we get into the main episode today, I wanted to pause and just tell you about the after show. You've probably heard us talk about it before, but we just had an after show conversation at the end of this episode you're about to listen to. And Daniel made some great points. It was a phenomenal discussion, and I think you would all benefit from it. But the only way to get the after show, and I hate to say it, is you've got to go behind the paywall and become an elite patron over at patreon.com/reason together. We don't often do this like with a commercial at the beginning, but if you've been listening for a while and you know the after show exists, it would be good for you to jump on board. Just my personal recommendation to you. There's no long-term contract or anything like that. There's no contract at all. You could sign up, support at the elite level. You get a t-shirt out of that, and you get to listen to the after show. And I just thought today's was especially great, though I think they're all great, but today's was especially good. Go over to patreon.com/reason together. Select elite level and become a patron over there, and we would be eternally grateful to you. Anyway, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just thanks so much for considering it.
Yeah. Okay. On to the main part of the show.
You're listening to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm your host, Daniel Fox, here with my great friend, Tom Balsamo, and hope you're doing well today. Thank you for joining the conversation. Again, let me say right at the outset, we appreciate feedback. And if you've got a thought for us to consider, to reason through, you want to throw a topic our way, whether it's something we've talked about, something we've never heard of before, send it our way at reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. How are you this morning, Tom?
I'm good. Woke up with a screaming headache this morning, but it's starting to go away now.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's no fun.
But otherwise, none the worse for wear.
All right. All right. Well, as we start off, I want to thank our patrons who have gone over to patreon.com/reason together and have signed up to support this podcast on an episode by episode basis. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your investment. And elite patrons, those who have kind of reached the tier of extra bonuses and access to the after show. Thank you for your tremendous investment as well. The way I've got it laid out this morning, I think we may have a very interesting discussion in the after show, but we'll see kind of how our time plays out. Okay. But looks like we've got a couple new elite patrons. Speaking of,
we do. We have Ethan, who has become an elite patron. Good to have Ethan on board.
Yeah, thanks,
Ethan.
If
we haven't already shouted him out on here, here it is. So we appreciate you joining up there over at patreon.com/reason together. And Daniel, not you, Daniel, a different Daniel the second, the other Daniel, has signed up to be an elite patron. And I don't know if people must just love the t-shirts. It's
yeah. Hey, I call them fine menswear, fine ladies wear, whoever happens to be wearing it. But I think they look neat. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Excellent.
It's
well,
good
thank
stuff.
You guys for joining up over there.
Ethan, Daniel the second, thank you very much for coming on board here. And let's see. Can I jump into some feedback we got here?
Yeah, go right ahead. Take it away.
Okay. Nathan writes in regarding the issue of whether to frequent an establishment such as a casino. We talked about, say, like a casino versus other options like a truck stop with gambling machines in it, or Applebee's, the bar-ish atmosphere or whatever. He said, I was reminded of something I learned in Bible college that has stuck with me. He mentions a speaker who was taught the principle that a Christian's boycott of an establishment, company, etc., should only extend as far as the entity's, here's the term, present dominant association. In other words, what's the dominating association presently? Is it one of sin or otherwise? In other words, you go to a casino, obviously the dominant association is one of vice, he says here, while a gas station, sells gas. Their dominant association.
Right.
Applebee's, largely known for selling food. So That's his take on it. He said it's basically what you guys said, but I wanted to share the term. It is sometimes nice to have those terms. Present, he says, has here present dominate association. I don't know if that's dominant or
I think it's
or
dominant.
dominating.
Dominant.
Yeah. Okay. Present dominant
Typo.
association. So anyway, kind of that term has helped to remember the principle.
Yeah. We had somebody write in, it might have been Ethan, if I remember right, about, okay, so an example would be like a place that is like a brewery and they have the world's most amazing burger, right? It's the only place you could get it. So you look at an example like that. Yes, the present dominant association is that it is a brewery, but it has something that is unique or somehow extravagant or better than you could get somewhere else. Does that change the dynamic?
There's just it is still pretty nuanced. And I'm thinking of a scripture passage here in, is it First Corinthians 8? I want to say we've referenced it a number of times. And it's just interesting to me, and I hate to mention it because I haven't thought through it enough, but it struck me that Paul said, if the brother with the weaker conscience sees you sitting at meat in the idol's temple, it doesn't say if he sees you purchasing meat that had been in the idol's temple. It says if he sees you sitting at meat in the idol's temple. In other words, it's like you went there to eat. I don't know if they somehow served the food there, like you actually ate there instead of sold you the food to take home and prepare and eat. And that's very interesting to me because it seems like a pretty close parallel to today, that a guy could walk into a temple and not say, well, you know what this temple stands for and you know what they do and I'm supporting the cause. He's just going in there to eat.
Right.
Maybe they got some cheap meat. If I could twist it a little bit, maybe they got a good burger, and he goes in there and he says, I'm just buying the burger. I'm not buying an association. I'm not supporting a cause. I'm just buying a burger, so I can't, I'm not going to say that there's an absolute black and white up and down here.
Yeah.
On that, as far as, you can't go in there because it is a brewery. And that's not to say that I'm being soft on alcohol companies. I despise the effects of alcohol.
Right.
But,
yeah, there's a fine balance too between being one of those Christians who lives their entire life based on how they're going to be seen or perceived. Where every association is a careful deliberation for that Christian, where they have to literally pour their mind into every single thing that they're associated with because someone might perceive it the wrong way. I'm not certain, and this is maybe a different discussion for another time, I'm not certain that the Lord really intends for us as Christians to live our life so paralyzed by what others think of us.
And Tom, I think
and
that you are... Go ahead. Finish.
I was going to say the balance to that is that testimony does matter to a point.
Yes. But I think you're speaking to a significant swath, maybe, of fundamental Christianity there. There is a burden of negotiating perceptions, with that, like you said, carefully weighing every association. What are people going to think about this? That's interesting. So maybe we'll save that for another discussion. Yeah. And so way back when, now we're on episode 180 something, way back when we actually touched on the idea, that meaning of avoid all appearance of evil.
Yes. Yeah. The common misuse of that verse. One of the points that Ethan made in his feedback was that if let's say you do go into that gas station where it's just a gas station, but they happen to sell lottery tickets. Right.
Right.
So the present dominant association is not gambling. It's gasoline. But yet let's say the owner is someone who just loves money. I mean, they've hit it big in the fuel industry. Maybe they've got a chain of gasoline stations where they're just making money hand over fist. they're living an opulent lifestyle because they love money, right? Um, how is that worse if we go spend our money at a gas station belonging to them? We're essentially effectuating, and this gets into the conversation about boycotts and stuff. We're essentially effectuating the owner's love of money. We're in
Mm-hmm.
a sense
Mm-hmm.
helping him with his love of money to a
Mm-hmm.
degree. How is it that we don't see that as being as bad as us walking into a brewery to buy a burger? You know what I mean? It's like if you think it's wrong to go into a brewery to buy a burger, how do we not think it's wrong to see some owner who has some love of money, and yet we're going and we're spending our money there? Wouldn't the right thing to do to be to help them?
Yeah.
And so on. And I realize there's probably a half a dozen ways to look at that question, but
Mhm.
that's I guess Ethan's point, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is essentially saying that, we're not solving every issue here
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
avoiding the brewery that has a good burger and yet going to the gas station and spending money there. Um,
Yeah.
go on.
I think one balancing factor, is on the one hand, I don't necessarily think that the intent is only ever to patronize Christians. Um,
Right.
Meaning that, well, if my money is not only buying a product but supporting a cause, well, then I have to have a Christian contractor and shop at a Christian grocery store and a Christian car dealership and whatever. So I don't think that's the other that's the intent. But on the other side of it, there are obviously some businesses that what will be their product is more harmful to the general public than others. I
Right.
shop at a gas station; they sell gas. We drive cars. If I shop somewhere else and they produce mind altering substances or pornography or whatever.
Yeah.
Not that I shop at some place with porn, but I'm saying that just a porn shop. But I'm just saying,
Well, I mean, if you
oh,
buy a book at Barnes and Nobles,
ooh,
you're doing
okay,
that.
okay.
So
Well, and that's a good point. So you got, oh, Barnes and Noble, I'm buying a book, but then they've got a whole homosexuality section or whatever. Well,
mhm.
so yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, you just, and that's why I say it leads into the whole boycott conversation. You cannot boycott something sufficiently enough to satisfy a very sensitive conscience.
Mhm.
You just can't do it because everything you spend your money on in one way or another supports something you disagree with.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a fact. You can't do it
Because it could
consistently
be
enough.
because most likely you're going to be buying from an unsaved person who has habits and lifestyles that you don't care for, and of course
Right.
you're supporting that. So,
You, as one thing you said reminded me of a verse in Galatians, Galatians 6:10. As
mm,
we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. So I do think there is a case to be made that if you do have the opportunity to patronize a brother in Christ's business to help him, that's a benefit. That's a good thing. Not that you have to. I don't think.
mhm.
I don't think this verse is necessarily prescriptive. It seems more like a recommendation to especially those of the household of faith. It's not saying exclusively those of the household of faith.
Yeah, yeah. And doing good isn't just patronizing them. Sometimes they're not the best workers. They're not the best person for the job. Um, the Christian person versus a secular person. Unfortunately, your
Mhm.
unsaved guy may actually be better at the job.
Yeah,
It may,
sometimes.
yeah, sometimes. But okay, let's see here. Let me slide that over. Thanks for that feedback there, Nathan and Ethan. Somebody else asks here, Tom. I thought this is interesting. What's the main difference between hospitality and entertainment? Do you need a house to be hospitable? Um, it is interesting because in the English rendering of that, it talks about entertaining strangers unawares, right? Um,
Yeah.
Maybe that speaks a little bit of that question revolves around the semantics of it. Um, Entertainment versus hospitality. Do you see a difference in those two terms and what they indicate?
I do see a difference, and I'm kind of struggling to wrap my head around it on the fly here. So I'm kind of shooting from the hip. Um, but when it comes to hospitality, I think there is a more thoughtful approach to
hmm
what someone might need or want. That you're thinking of the situation from their point of view. What do they need and what do they want right now?
Hmm.
And how can I fill that need for them?
I can.
Whereas entertainment oftentimes has a mutual benefit for both the giver and the receiver, where let's just have a good time, and there it's a maybe a little less thoughtful. Not I'm shooting from the hip. That
Yeah.
may not
Well,
be
can can
100%
can I interrupt
right.
you here for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
It sounds right as far as how you're describing hospitality, because it looks to me, and I haven't done a research on this word, but I'm wondering about kind of the derivation of this English word here. Even hospitality looks very similar to hospital.
Mhm.
Is that, and a hospital is a place where you go for care and for, healing and for things like that. So hospitality seems to me to be a nurturing, caring outreach, if you will, or
Right.
intake to someone, where entertainment speaks more to, at least in our modern usage of something that diverts our attention and
Yeah.
amuses us.
So you reminded me of that episode we did with Pastor Scott Vanderhart,
Okay.
when he talked about how he treats missionaries that come
hmm
through. And he's a man that has done extensive thinking and interviewing and work to try and understand what it is missionaries or people on deputation or furlough, what it is that they need and want when they
hmm
are traveling and coming through your church. And I think it was a great approach. I forget what episode number it was. You can search for that on our website at reasontogether.fm if you'd like to hear that. But the difference with some, and I myself have traveled on deputation in the past.
hmm hmm
Some churches you go to, they entertain you. I'm thinking of one church in particular where it was a
mm
5-day long missions conference, and every single day we were up early in the morning, out doing fun activities with the pastor. I mean, he was like our tour guide for the week,
Yeah, he thought he was kind of
and
making it enjoyable for you
right,
and giving you fun
and I
stuff to do.
sure, and I appreciate the intention.
hmm
But we would get back to the place where we were staying, later in the afternoon and evening, just tuckered out. And we our kids were little at the time, and we were just worn out. And now it's time to go over to the church for the night for the services
Right.
and preach and present ministry and do all this stuff, and keep your kids from getting lost and dying somewhere. So was that entertaining? Yes, but I think hospitality is an example of what like Pastor Vanderhart was doing, where he asks missionaries, what is it that you would like to see happen? And how can we do that? Just be honest with us about what missionaries need, and that's what we'll do. That to me is the difference between hospitality and entertainment.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Um, the as far as in our English, I'm looking up the. I know it's probably is it First Timothy 3:2. Um, a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality. And it's basically um, the original word, kind of a compound of uh, philos, a love, a brotherly, I guess, as we say, love, and xenon, which is like a stranger. We say xenophobia. So it's like a love of strangers.
Interesting.
Uh, yeah, or a love of, and I think strangers might even have the idea of travelers in the day, uh, you know. But so someone who cares for strangers or travelers. It's also seen though in Romans 12:13, distributing to the necessity of the saints. And this is not in a so much in a ministry qualification context, but just in to the saints, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. Same root word there.
Hmm.
Um, So anyway, so can you love people and be a welcoming person without a house? Sure. Yeah, I would
Yes.
think so.
Yes.
Um, is there a difference between hospitality and entertainment? Yeah, I think there can be, certainly in approaches. Maybe uh, the motivation may be similar, um, but the thoughtfulness of it, or I don't know what how informed it is, maybe affects whether
Right.
it moves from entertainment to hospitality.
Right. And I'm almost certain there's a word for seeing something from someone else's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's not introspective. That'd be the opposite. But
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be a word for that, and
Yeah,
I think there is. I just can't think of it.
contraspective. I don't know.
Hmm.
Okay. Entertainment, though, yeah, to me, I guess has the idea almost maybe more of diversion, like to divert someone, to
Yeah.
take their mind off of something, to make them
Yeah.
happy. Where the hospitality is the idea of to welcome, to nurture, to care for.
Right.
Um,
And if you don't have another question you're immediately wanting to jump to, I have one listed here that might take the rest of the episode.
okay,
We don't have to do it now
okay.
unless you want to. You can jump on something else if you want.
Well, I had one here, but no, I'm fine. If you want to switch to something else, there's just one that I'll kind of introduce right before the after show.
We're gonna have to do rock paper scissors for it. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
You ready?
You
Let's
ready?
see.
So now, do
Ready?
you do 1, 2, 3, then throw the
One, two,
symbol?
three. Then throw the symbol. We'll just do one. Okay. Not two, not best 2 out of 3. Just whoever wins this one wins it. Ready?
Okay, ready?
One,
1,
two,
2,
three.
3.
Shoot. Oh, we both went scissors. All right. Ready?
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Shoot. Ah.
You turkey.
Paper beats rock. All right. So I have written down this question here: courtship, dating, or other. And I am not sure that in 180 something episodes that we've ever actually talked at length about what do you do when your kids are getting older and you start actually having to think like in time frames. Not that you never think seriously when your kids are little about who they're going to marry. This may sound weird. I've been praying for the wife of my sons
Sure.
for quite some time. Don't know
Right.
who she
Likewise.
is. Don't know who they are. But someday we will. And but as they get older and you start to think about these things, you know, it becomes a little more serious of a subject, I guess. And
Yeah.
someone recently sent me an article. I may have forgotten to link that in the question. But someone sent me an article on dating. And I'm going to try my best to represent what he described. But he's making a case for traditional dating as opposed to courtship. And
Now, of course, you're going to have to describe your term here. What is traditional dating? Okay.
that's
okay.
exactly what I was getting into next. Is that yeah. See, that is why we have this podcast, is because we may be completely different guys with totally different personalities. But the one thing we always had in common when we would talk is, what do you mean by that?
And we're
that
willing
was our
to actually
connection
listen
point
to
early
each
on.
other. Yes.
So and I'll try to link to the article from in the show notes. I forget his name, Thomas. I'm probably going to mess up the last name, Umstad or something like that. I don't know how to say it.
Okay.
Seems like Scandinavian or something. I don't know who he is. I don't know what background he's from or what circles he's in, which I prefer not knowing because it allows me to just evaluate his content based on the content alone. And he made some very good points. So he describes courtship, and again, I'm going from memory here, effectively the idea that it involves heavy parental oversight. Differentiating that from advice, he calls it oversight or administration of a relationship.
He calls that courtship.
Courtship, yeah. That there's heavy parental involvement. To begin a courtship relationship, a man has to be at the point in his life where he is ready to be married. He has to have marriage in view when he begins this courtship. In other words, you don't do it with a question mark at the end of the courtship. It's basically marriage is in view here. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm asking for courtship. And he has to ask the father's permission and so on, essentially like an engagement almost.
Mm-hmm.
And to maybe paraphrase what he's saying is that it has a much more serious feel to it
Mm-hmm.
than dating. And dating, he describes essentially as it's very lighthearted, almost like initiating a friendship, like a one-on-one friendship, to see what happens, to see if there's any sort of like-mindedness with the person, if the families have like-mindedness, and so on. And it's not exclusive, meaning you could go on a date with someone on Saturday, and then next Friday night you could go on a date with someone else, because it's very lighthearted. There's no implication, there's no implying in a date that this is anything more serious than just, I'd like to see if we're like-minded. And he's trying to make the case in his article that based on some of the research he's done, that courtship hasn't ended well for a large majority of the people that he's researched, because it makes things too serious too quick. So you're expecting some 20, 21-year-old guy, whatever, to have all of his spiritual faculties in order enough that he would have to know who he is most likely to marry, who the will of God may be for his life. And he has to know that before the first date, essentially, because courtship is so serious that you're essentially asking for her hand in marriage almost. And you can see evidence of this seriousness in the fact that when a courtship breaks up, it's very awkward afterwards. It's heartrending for many afterwards, that the families oftentimes can't be in the same area, sometimes even in the same church afterwards, because the courtship was so serious and then it has to be broken off. So he makes the case that courtship accelerates things. It's like putting your foot on the gas pedal, as it were, when it's actually, its intent was to do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But he says courtship is basically like engagement without the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just often too fast and too serious for young people. And he gives an example of having interviewed his grandmother, who was dating people back in the 1930s and 40s. And the rule that their parents had for them was, if you're going to go out on a date, the rule is you got to date somebody else next week. You can't date the same person twice, is basically what it was. And she describes a time when everyone was dating in junior high and high school, and it was lighthearted, it was friendly, it was a different person often every week or every other week, which sounds kind of weird. It sounds, by today's standards, almost like a woman would be sort of a floozy if she did that by today's standards. But that is the case he makes, is that we've essentially changed the definition of dating today. Now, when you look at dating in the modern world, it means people are looking to hook up on the first night.
Mm-hmm.
That's dating today. But he said it wasn't like that. And the people from her generation, his grandmother's generation, they dated young in high school, they married young, and they stayed married for 50 plus years on average until one of them died. Whereas we're just not seeing that. And he cites some research that he's done in the article. But he's basically troubled by what he's seen with the push for courtship, including things like where young women who come from courtship-minded families essentially never get married. And you end up with these women basically living with their mom and dad well into older years. Not that that's always a bad thing. Okay. I'm not saying every woman who's not married and living with their parents comes from that kind of family. But in some cases, essentially the father being so courtship minded and teaching the girl to be so courtship minded essentially rules out every good, honest, hardworking Christian young man with character, because he wants to come and ask out someone on a date. And he doesn't want to accelerate as quickly as the father wants to, because the father's interested in finding someone to court his daughter. Um, so he demonstrates a lot of troubling results from courtship in favor of dating. Now, I am not really, and that's why I put in the question, courtship, dating, or other, because my personal opinion on it is that courtship may be appropriate for some young people, but it's not a one size fits all. And I think dating may be appropriate for some young people, that approach. But again, it's not one size fits all. And that's why I say other, because it might be some combination of those two things, even within the same family. And he did a follow-up article, and I realize I'm talking, I've been talking for a while now here, but he did a follow-up article where he answered people's objections. And one of the common objections was, are you saying parents shouldn't be involved in a Christian young person's relationships? He was not suggesting that at all. So I thought really the second article was just as good, because he answered a lot of the common objections, and I'll link to that one too in the show notes. So all that to say, courtship, dating, or other, go.
Yeah. There's so much to be said, and sometimes even when you see a deficiency in a certain position, it's problematic to attribute the entirety of that deficiency to one reason.
Yes.
We might say, oh, these girls remain unwed because of courtship. Well, they might remain unwed because of a hyper-controlling father who uses courtship because it kind of plays into his style.
Yes.
Now, that being said, just as a quick background to show you kind of where my answer is going to go with this, is when I began to get to know my who's now my wife, I was like, whatever you want to call it, dating or courtship. You know what I mean? I didn't really care about the term.
Right.
So it really goes back to, we kind of lump this specific decision into, we try to lump it into a title. Oh, are you finding your mate by courtship or by dating? And of course then okay, now anyway. So, but the question is, as we've asked so many times in the past, or as people have a million times in the past, how do I know the will of God? Well, that goes back to some typical responses. Do I what's Psalm? Desire, am I desiring the will of God? Am I seeking wise counsel? Am I being who I ought to be? Am I spirit led? A lot of those things. I think the prime maybe difference would be the involvement specifically of parents. And to me, I think on both sides, that's very important.
Yes.
So that my parent, in theory, and again, this, so much shifts here, because we could give the ideal answer, like, this would be ideal. And then you turn to, the 16-year-old girl who, has a single parent family, and the single parent is unsaved and has a live-in boyfriend. You're like, okay, it's not the ideal situation already. What are we telling that person to do? But if my parents are spirit-led, spiritual people, they would likely come to the same conclusion I would. If we're both, 100%. If we're both thinking along the same lines. So the idea, I don't want my dad to pick out my partner. Okay, well, I'm not saying that a dad has to pick out the partner.
Yeah.
But should we really be scared of our dad's opinion? Oh, Dad, you're just so outdated. You don't know. Well, if that's your approach to your dad, then I think there's a problem going into it. So on the one hand, if you're say you're the guy, you should be saying, Mom, Dad, I'm interested in this girl. I think she could be the one. Here's why I like her. Wow, that's great. Well, we'd like to meet her, so we could get to know her. And then as they get to know her, he might say, well, what do you think? What, I noticed this. I noticed this. Oh, well, yeah. Have you ever thought about this? Have you noticed that? Oh, okay. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a totally open lines of communication.
Yes.
The flip side of that is that when he is thinking about a relationship with this girl, I personally think that parental permission is something that ought to be pursued. Now I say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that makes it awkward. Well, this is somebody's daughter.
Right.
And for me, if some kid just comes up and says, hey, and talks to one of my girls, let's go out.
Yeah.
I can't say that
Yeah,
I'm
and,
for
and
that.
his article was not denying the involvement of parents and giving permission. I think the main thrust of it was the seriousness of it. If I could put it into one word, is he said courtship essentially makes it too serious too fast. So
Uh-huh.
so again, he's not against a guy saying, can I ask your daughter out on a date? You know, he's not against that. Um, he was very clear about that in the follow up article. I think it's more that essentially what in some circles we've turned courtship into it is like engagement without the ring.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
I can see what he's saying about the seriousness of courtship. Where I would more disagree, probably, or I get a little concerned, is on the lightness, quote unquote, of the dating. I think that maybe is, and maybe I'm anyway. I just think maybe it's a little unrealistic to say, oh, I could go out by myself with a girl, and it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it
yeah,
does. Of course it does, because you're attracted to this girl. The hormones are flowing a little bit. She says, "Oh, he's singled me out, and he likes me." That's a very powerful thing. And so to just
yeah.
say, "I'm going to go out with you, and it's going to mean nothing." No,
Yeah,
that's
and
not
that
true.
was
It's going to
that
mean
was
something.
one of my similar criticisms of the article, sort of similar to what you're saying, but maybe a little different in that he tries to suggest rather dogmatically that dating reduces the sexualization of the relationship and courtship increases it quicker. And he didn't really provide any evidence of this. It was basically how he sees it, which he's
Hmm.
entitled to his opinion.
Right. He's got his
But
own
I
background.
think I think either one can sexualize things quickly. It just depends on the young people involved.
Yeah, or I was going to say either
um,
one could or could not.
right, right,
Yeah, it depends on the people involved and what
yeah.
their focus is,
So I thought he made a
brother.
lot of good points, but that one point I think was too strong and too dogmatic, really, without any evidence for the claim.
Here's what we've kind of said in our home, and where he kind of he calls it dating. I say, well, what you could the way you learn somebody and say, what's their family like? Are we compatible or whatever? Be their friend.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
you don't typically go on dates with friends, but you're in groups. You have your friend group, right? And the
Yeah,
five of us are together. Well, in that group, you're having lots of conversations. You're seeing that person's sense of humor. You're seeing what they're sensitive to. You're
yeah,
seeing whether they're a whiner. You're seeing whether they primp a lot or whatever. And then you talk about their family, and you see what
yeah.
their reaction is to
So
mom and dad. There's a lot that you learn in a friend group, but to say, I need to go on a date so I can learn about their family. No, you don't.
So not to make this overly complicated, but I was recently talking with someone who told me about their Bible college experience.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to a particular Bible college up in the far north that I will not mention here. um, and and we're
Like
I'm
Saskatchewan.
it, not yeah not that far north, but
Okay.
yeah. But I would not be talking about Bravo Company Manufacturing if I referenced a particular acronym. It would not be Bravo Company Manufacturing.
Oh,
Um,
brother.
but I've never been there. I don't know how true it
Mm-hmm.
is, though I'm just taking this person's word at it. I trust them. But they said that there's no dating allowed there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Like not at all. There's no dating allowed. But essentially what happens in an environment where you have young people of the same age, both male and female, is that you end up with fairly close, exclusive friendships.
Right, you just call it something different.
You just call it something different. So there's a lot of semantics involved in the whole conversation of courtship, dating, and exclusive friendships in groups.
Now, I realize that what I'm saying partly too is given a certain dynamic. If you have a young man who is 17 or he is 20 and he has a friend group or he's in college, that's easier to do what I'm saying, to have a friend group. If you've got a guy who's 25, he's not married, he's working in the workplace, and he's got ladies in the office, that he chats with and blah blah blah, and he just feels like, yeah, I'm a friend with this lady, and we go out for our lunch together. Okay, I'm not going to shoot that down and say, oh,
Yeah.
you can't go out to lunch with that lady because that's okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say as a healthy habit of young people, get to know somebody in the friend culture,
Yes,
and not
absolutely.
and then when you start to say, I'm attracted to this girl, and we, for I don't want to use the terms too much, that the compatibility thing, I guess, in some ways. But I
Right.
mean, you say, but I think that
Well, we
I
use the
like her.
Christian word for it. It's like-mindedness.
There you go.
Same thing, different word.
Yeah, but really, I mean, you start to sense a like-mindedness or a like-heartedness in somebody. You say,
Yeah.
"Wow, that girl really loves the Lord, and she
Yeah.
seems to have similar standards to our family, and I like her personality, and whatever. Okay, then
Yeah.
then you start to watch more closely."
Yeah.
Until finally you think, I think I'd like to get to know this girl.
Mhm.
And you do pursue it
I
with the
just,
intention
oh,
of marriage, but you're not going to pursue a girl prior to being ready to marry.
yeah.
Now, so you're not going to, and I'm saying, not saying that you ask her dad saying, I'm
Right.
ready to marry and I think your girl might be the one, but to say, I'm not going to start pursuing girls because it makes me feel good and because I like to
Yeah.
belong to somebody.
Right. So what you're saying is, and again, there's semantics involved in here as well, because in the article he talks about dating, and I'm using the word lighthearted. Okay, I forget if that was his phrase or not. That's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
using,
Mm-hmm.
lighthearted. But that does not mean unserious.
Mm-hmm.
You can do something in a lighthearted way without it being unserious, and that's what I think dating should be. If you're going to go out on dates as a young person, keep it lighthearted, but don't be unserious about it. It is still a serious thing that you are
Right.
doing,
Right.
but that doesn't mean it. You have to put your foot on the gas pedal and say, "Okay, I've asked her father now. Now I can go out on a date with her, and this is all going to end in marriage, most likely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this because dating is for people who don't have marriage in view." Not true. And keep it lighthearted, but don't be unserious about it.
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, he can cite his grandma and whatever. I mean, glad that worked out for her. But
Yeah.
just saying, the idea that you have to date multiple people in order to find the right one, I'm like, what? No, no. You can
Yeah.
have a pretty good idea by the time you start getting serious with somebody that
Very good
this
point.
very well could be the one. I don't.
Very good point. And that's what, so we had a long conversation about this article with our sons because they're teenage boys. And, I kind of talked it over with them and with my wife, and we just had a family conversation about it. And that was another thing that he really didn't say in his article, is that as a Christian young person, if you've had a solid upbringing, if you've been taught in the ways of the Lord and you are a spirit-filled young person, you don't really have to date 20 people in a youth group to know who's right and who's not. If you've been trained in the ways of identifying the strange woman,
Mhm.
you can identify her behavior from across the room. And you can
Yeah.
immediately walk in and say, nope, 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 nope. You know what I mean? And it doesn't
Sure.
take long to narrow it down. And by the way, my personal opinion with the way that the generations have been going, it's easier now, perhaps more than ever, to identify the nopes.
Yeah, yeah.
But all that to say, yeah, I agree with you. If you've been taught wisdom as a young person, you shouldn't have to go date around 20 people or a
No.
different person every week. You can narrow it down pretty quickly as to who would even be a viable candidate for marriage. And again, is marriage in view? Yeah, maybe, but maybe not when it comes to a date. And I think that's the mentality that I think we need to go into it with, is to take away the seriousness, in a sense, of courtship, is to say, well, maybe this won't work out. If I go out on this date with this girl, maybe this isn't who I thought it was. Right.
Yeah, and I may be misreading you a little bit, but I would disagree with this statement when we say is marriage in view, maybe not. I would say, well, yeah, it's always in view. I mean,
Well,
if that's
I think you misunderstood me.
yeah, I was wondering because
Yeah,
you're saying is it may not work out in this situation.
that's
for
what I
marriage.
meant. It may not
Right.
work out. But yeah, marriage is always in view because we don't believe in hookup culture.
Yeah, like
Right.
why would I be drawing close to this woman if I didn't think I mean, what relationship would I expect outside
where
of
would this
merit? Where would this go?
right? Where would it end up? Sure.
Right. So I'm sure there's much more to be said, and we've stirred up the thought of listeners, and they want to share.
And something you said earlier, kind of, well, it's a can of worms, but if you have a son who is growing older and getting to that age where he might potentially consider a life's mate, does she have to have identical standards to your family? Because you had mentioned the idea of having the same standards. That's going to be hard to find someone who has identical standards to your family. What if she doesn't? Is she still a viable candidate for marrying your child? Or is the deal off from the outset? But we are out of time to have that conversation.
Poke.
Yeah. We may have to, I don't know that you had something planned already for the after show, so we might have to circle back around.
Oh, no. We might do that next time.
Yeah.
If we need to continue this.
Yeah. Anyway, well, we appreciate you listeners joining us for this episode. Thank you to you patrons for supporting us and helping us pay our editors and our internet stuff and taking care of all of that. We appreciate you very much. Thank you for joining us. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.